Well, good morning. I guess we'll get started. It's about 25 after, so good to have you all with us. So let me open with a word of prayer, and then we'll kind of begin our discussion of how to apply the laws of Lostology. Dear God, just thank you so much for this day. Just ask you bless this time together as we look at how we can be more effective in our evangelism. And Lord, just speak to us through your word and through the concepts that we'll be going through. Just ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so the name of this class is Applying the Laws of Lostology. And if I know both of you all probably have heard Herschel's series on Lostology, and it's based on a book with that title. Morning, guys.
Hey, good morning.
And So one of the things I wanted to do in this class was to take those laws and actually kind of unpack them a little bit and actually apply them to our own lives. A lot of times, sometimes we hear things in sermons and then we just kind of put them aside and don't kind of apply that. So I thought I'd try to put a little more intentionality into that application with this. So really this, in my mind, is the beginning of sort of a three-class series looking at the topic of evangelism. Hi, guys. And so first we're going to be doing this class. The next 6-week series, I'm going to be doing a series on doubting Christianity, looking at things that sometimes Christians struggle with regard to doubts, and also things that people that you run into may bring up relative to questions about Christianity. And so we're going to look at that from both perspectives. And then next summer, I hope to go through a little more in-depth apologetics class to kind of get at some of those doubt issues in a little more detail. So that's kind of the overall agenda that I've got laid out for the year. In the back, you've got some materials. There's a syllabus that looks like this, and so I'll be going through that momentarily. There was also a pre-test that I'll let you all work on in a second. There's a discussion guide that we'll be walking through some questions on the flip side of the pretest. There's also a list of the laws of Lostology with a synopsis of each of those. There's actually 24 of those. And then I had a handout kind of summarizing a perspective of the gospel, and I'll have a little exercise in a moment where I'll be asking you all to kind of think through in your own words, what is the gospel, and how would you communicate that to someone? So I think you've got all those materials I've identified. Let me talk about the course description. So we're looking at the concept of Lostology, which I'm defining as a study of being spiritually lost and what that experience can teach Christians about effective evangelism. Sometimes I think we approach people that are lost, and we have certain preconceptions about them that may be providing barriers really to us reaching those. So we want to really kind of look at what it means to be lost from their perspective and see if those insights can help us in better sharing our faith. The textbook for the course is a text by John Cramp, which is a really good book, Out of Their Faces and Into Their Shoes. He goes through 24 different laws of Lostology and gives some personal anecdotes for each of those chapters. It's a really excellent book. I highly recommend it. He's actually written a subsequent book on following the leader, which is also very good. And my name is Lindell Ormsbee, for those of y'all that I have not met before, which I think is not very many people. But anyway, if you want to go back, like I mentioned, Herschel actually did a series on Lostology last year, I think, or a year before, and there's actually 4 videos that captures most of those, I think captures all those sermons. I think Chris actually preached one of those, but that gives you some background. You can go over and look at those. And then relative to the course objectives, there's really sort of an effective, cognitive, and a behavioral. One of the things we hope to come out of this class is developing deeper passion for reaching the lost, and then a cognitive objective is to actually understand the laws of Lostology, and then finally to take those and put them into practice in pursuing the lost. So in thinking about trying to get a better sense of what it means to be lost. We'll be going through these laws. I've got some other literature I'll be giving you, and then also, for those of y'all that know me, I love movies, and so I'm always looking at movies for insights into not only the director and the actors, but the message underneath. And so there's a lot of movies out there that capture the essence, I think, of lost people, and sometimes we get disconnected from that. And so here's a few that I've listed, both that have sort of redemptive theme in the movie and also those that sort of have a tragic theme. So sometimes when we get disconnected from lost people, sometimes I think you can use movies to kind of re-engage and then look at the movie as you're watching it from an evangelistic perspective and thinking about these characters. How would you reach those individuals with the gospel? It's a different way to look at movies, for example. So with that, if you've got your first sheet, the pre-test, I want you to take a few minutes. I've got 24 laws of Lostology, but some of them are incorrect and correct. So I want you to walk through that and see what kind of answers that you can come up with as far as what do you think those are true or false. So let's take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll get back together on that. Okay, so we'll go through those in just a second, but again, we're looking at trying to develop some insights into understanding what it means to be lost. I think this can be especially helpful if you've grown up in the church and you've kind of feel like you're born into Christianity. I put that in quotes. Sometimes we don't have an appreciation of some of the things that lost people are struggling with. And so I think one of the important things is to first try to put yourself as the author talks about in their shoes. I've got a couple of quotes I want to read that kind of, I think, put in context this overall question before we go into these true-false questions. The first quote is by Blaise Pascal. He says, "If real success is to attend to the effort to bring a man to a definite position, one must first of all take the pains to find where he is and begin there. This is the secret of the art of helping others. Anyone who has not mastered this is himself deluded when he proposes to help others." Another quote is by Soren Kierkegaard, who said, "In order to help another one effectively, I must first understand more than he, yet first of all, surely I must understand what he understands. If I do not know that, my greater understanding will be of no help to him. If, however, I am disposed to plume myself on my greater understanding, it is because I am vain or proud, so that at the bottom, instead of benefiting him, I want to be admired. But all true effort to help begins with self-humiliation." And then a third quote that I really like from Pascal. He says, "When we want to correct someone usefully and show him that he is wrong, we must see from what point of view he is approaching the matter, for it is usually right from that point of view, and we must admit this. But then show him the point of view from which he is wrong. This will please him because he will see that he was not wrong, but merely failed to see every aspect of the question." I think those are three very profound thoughts when we think about trying to help people find Christ and looking at what our motivation is in sharing our faith. Are we just trying to show people that we're right or how smart we are? As Kierkegaard talks about, all attempts to help someone begin at self-humiliation. We need to approach evangelism, I think, from humility. Even though we feel we may have the right answer in that particular situation, we need to be humble in approaching that. And we also need to understand why they're thinking the way they are, just not assume that they're wrong or they don't know anything or something like that. So that really kind of sets the stage for looking at these 24 laws here. Let's kind of walk through those and see what you came up with relative to a true or false answer. So the first question was, being lost can be fun. How many people said that was true? Everybody? Do you think sometimes people in church think that lost people are miserable? Yeah, but some of them are pretty happy from what I've found. Yeah. I mean, I run into a lot of college students that are very happy being lost. They're having a really good time, okay, at least from their perspective. But sin ultimately has a consequence. A lot of times people aren't considering or engaging or dealing with the consequences, right? But yeah, I think it can be lost. It can be fun to be lost at times. How about no one gets lost on purpose? Do most people get up in the day and say, today I'm going to get lost? Normally not, right? Okay. Although I think some people can be running from God, and they're just trying to get away from Him and the consequences of what that means. What about question 3? It is hard to get lost. Is that true or false? That's false. Okay. Anybody ever lose their keys? Is that hard to do? No. Okay. Yeah, it can be easy to get lost, right? I don't know what people did before GPSs in cars. I don't know what they did. They did use maps. That's right, those nice little paper things. Yes, I remember those, Laura. I still use maps, much to the consternation of some of the people in my family. It's like, it's on a GPS. It's like, yeah, but I have to have a visual picture in my mind exactly where I'm going. So, but I guess I contribute that to my Boy Scout days. But anyway, what about question 4? You can be lost and not know it. Is that true or false? True? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Last year, I had a new employee at work, and we were going to West Virginia, and we drove out to the interstate from UK, and we came to we actually went out Newtown, so we should have taken a right, and I just naturally took a left. We're on 75. We're just talking. It's his first day in the job, so I'm going over this stuff. So we get up to Florence, where it's the mall, the big mall water tank, and I looked up and I saw that and I said, "How did we get here?" So we had to cut all the way across diagonally through Maysville and so on to get back on the way. But so I was obviously going in the wrong direction, but was totally clueless. All right, so that's very possible to do. What about number 5? Everyone admits when they are lost. False? Okay. That's false. I don't know why guys seem to have a harder time with that than ladies, but that seems to be the case, right? It's like, I'm not lost, I'm just going this other direction, right? So anyway, so yeah, I think sometimes our pride gets a hold of us there, right?
Yeah, we may know we're lost, but
we don't want to admit it, right? Okay. How about number 6? Admitting your loss is the first step in the right direction. True or false, you think? That's true. Okay. You're not going to get found or get out of being lost unless you admit that, right? What about when you're lost, you're totally in control? Is that true or false? That's false. Okay. When you're lost, you're really out of control because you don't know where you are. Okay, so you're not really in control. Yeah, right. But if you don't know where to start to get out of being lost, you're kind of out of control in that regard, right? Okay. What about 8? Just because a person is lost does not mean they are stupid. That's true. Okay. Do we ever think sometimes lost people are stupid? Huh? Too smart for their own good? Okay. What about 9? It's easy to trust a stranger. That's false. Okay. Absolutely. Number 10, people ask for directions without revealing their true emotions. That's true. Has anyone ever done that? Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell me where I am? Yeah. Okay. We got to keep up that facade, right? What about 11? Directions are always easy to follow. False. Yeah, anyone ever assemble anything with these like 20-step instructions, and then you end up with, yeah, yeah, you end up with several screws or bolts left over. Has anyone ever done that? Yeah, I'm one of those that doesn't read the instructions. I just said, I'm an engineer, I can do this. Right? And then there's like, what are these 3 screws for? I don't know. But they're not that important. The thing's standing, right? It should be fine. So, okay. How about number 12? Unnecessary details make directions less complicated. False. Sometimes I think as Christians we're so we are so caught up in just the vernacular and everything of Christianity that sometimes if we're trying to share our faith or something, we make things too complicated, right? We get distracted into side issues. Sometimes that can be precipitated by questions that are people asking. And it's like they're really asking one thing, and then we launch into a discourse about something else, right? So, right. That's why I think one of the things that I found, at least in working with students, is you just really need to be a good listener to really learn what people are dealing with, what their real questions are. A lot of times I think and part of this I think has been precipitated by the church in the West, and we've almost tried to commercialize evangelism. We have all these methodologies and steps or 4 spiritual laws and things like that we have to follow, and we use things like that without really focusing and customizing our response to the individual. Which, if you look at the New Testament, Jesus was always interacting with people personally and approached them differently. He didn't have a quote-unquote canned message that he was giving, right? How about number 13? A search reveals your values. Is that true or true? How about 14? Searches are always inexpensive. That's false. Okay. Certainly was false in the global case with Jesus coming to save people, and it's also false with regard to our interaction. If you're going to follow Christ in sharing your faith, that's going to cost you something, right? It's going to cost you time. It may cost you just emotional trauma, getting involved in someone's life. That can be costly of your time and other things. However, what about 15? Love pays whatever the search costs. True, all right? You think of the story, the parable Jesus gave about the 99 and the 1 lost sheep, and how he left the 99 and went off to find the 1 sheep. Okay. Sometimes it's easy just to write off people as an acceptable loss. So Jesus certainly didn't do that. 16, a search becomes your consuming priority. Is that true or false, you think? I think it's true. If one of your kids got lost in a mall, would that be a priority? You wouldn't keep shopping, right? Okay. How about 17? A search is always lost-centered, not searcher-centered. Is that true or false? Maybe I should say a search should be. Yeah. Sometimes it's not, right? We make it about us. Well, it's just going to inconvenience us. Okay. All right. 18, a search is urgent because the lost are in danger. That's true. Okay. 19, you must coordinate resources to maximize the search. I think sometimes we get, again, I don't know if this comes from just some of the personalized evangelism, but I think we have to recognize that certainly in today's culture, it's really a team we need to mobilize to reach people, not just necessarily individuals. I know, it's also true that there may be one individual that you have the greatest access to, but I think we need to recognize to be truly effective, we need to mobilize more than one person or team to basically try to pursue someone if we're trying to reach them. Okay. Well, at a minimum, you need to solicit a group of people to be praying for you and praying for that activity, right? So I guess the point is, sometimes we'll run into people that we recognize they have a certain need that we may not be able to really help address, but we have a colleague or another Christian friend that we can bring up alongside to help in that situation. Or I think another very powerful component of our evangelism is helping lost people see what a true Christian community looks like, right? That's why I think the community groups that we have can be so effective in that regard. It's just bringing people along to see that Christians are not these weird, strange people, that they have problems just like everybody else, and that they're in a community trying to help each other. How about number 20? Discouragement can threaten a successful search. That's true, okay. That's another reason why I think it's good to have a team working together to encourage each other. How about waiting as part of searching? That's true, okay. Sometimes, like we said, the very first law, being lost, can be fun. Sometimes you need to wait till a person's circumstances change that can open a door of need that we can then help try to meet, right? Number 22, successful searches always have happy endings. Well, that gets into the definition of the word successful, obviously, right? Jesus doesn't judge our success in witnessing by how many people are finding faith, right? So, I mean, we can, I think, be obedient and reach out to a search to the perspective that the person then comes to understand fully the gospel, and that can be a successful search. Ultimately, the success of the search with regard to that person coming to Christ is really outside of our hands anyway, right? So, okay. If you're searching, the lost may find you. That's absolutely true. All right. It's fascinating to me in my capacity as a professor at UK how God just seems to send students or staff that are struggling with issues. I don't know how they end up in my office, but they do. But so sometimes just putting yourself in that situation, God will start bringing people to you. You just need to be sensitive and listening when that happens. And when that happens, again, make that your main priority. I've learned just to drop everything when that happens and focus on that situation. And then we should never celebrate when the lost are found. Is that true or false? That's false. So clearly from Scripture, we see that that's false. All right? So this is a preview of these laws. We'll go back and review them before we close today. But this gives you some of the flavor, I think, of sometimes some of the preconceptions that we have about lost people. And hopefully as we start to reflect on these, we'll start to get a better sense of where they are and then how we can adapt our delivery of the gospel to them to make a more effective presentation. Okay, so if you flip over from the Lostology test, there's a couple of exercises I want to work through for the next few minutes. The first of these is a question: what are reasons for searching for the lost? And I've given you this passage out of 2 Corinthians 5:10 through 21, and I want you to read that. You can work on this as a team effort at your tables, okay, and see if you can come up with at least 4 reasons that Paul gives or 4 justifications for our evangelism in that passage, okay? So take a few minutes to work on that, and then we'll get back together and discuss your answers. All right, so in looking at that passage in 2 Corinthians, what are some of the motivations that you all came up with? We'll start with John's table first. Okay, knowing the fear of the Lord. Is that? Now, that can encompass several things, right? Like Herschel talked about last Sunday, talking about what does it mean to have a fear of the Lord, is like because we have respect and a desire to serve God, we're motivated to reach other people. It also could potentially have, because we know that God is to be feared and that God is a just God, that could motivate us out of concern for the peril of our lost friends as well, right? Okay, so you could look at multiple facets of that maybe. What was one of the answers you all came up with?
Knowing that Christ loves us.
Knowing that Christ loves us? Okay. So knowing the love of Christ. Way to glory. That's good, Seth. So we regard no one from the flesh. We recognize people are eternal beings. We don't look at them in a carnal state, that they're just people, but that they have the image of God impressed upon them, so they have a value that we should pursue to try to rescue. Okay? Okay, that's an assignment that God has given us. We're supposed to be, what does an ambassador do? What is their job? Are they there to represent themselves? They're there to represent someone else. Okay, in this case, who are we called to represent then? Jesus or Christ, right? So a fourth one, a fourth reason would be then to the fact that we are ambassadors for Christ. All right, so we have at least 4, maybe 5. So I had kind of collapsed the last one that you all mentioned into the fourth one, but that's pretty good. You all came up with the same answers I did. All right. I want to read a few more quotes to talk about some additional reasons, or not necessarily additional, but kind of build on these reasons for sharing our faith. And the first quote does come from C.S. Lewis. Thank you very much, Seth, for the reference here. From The Way to Glory. He says, and this is talking about one motivation gets to the glory of the lost, which kind of gets into the fact that we don't regard people from the flesh, okay? Lewis says, it is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you'd be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other towards one of these destinations. It is in light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with awe and the circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all our dealings with one another. There are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. It's a very sobering concept, isn't it? Sometimes I know if I'm in line at the store and there's a problem with the checkout, I start to get frustrated and say, what is the problem with this person? And just that thought is really demeaning that person and really truly who they are. And we need to recognize that everybody that we come in contact with are immortal beings. And the question is, do we really treat them that way, and do we value them enough to share the gospel with them? Another quote is looks at the whole concept of the brokenness of the lost. I think one of the motivations is we're trying to help people, save people. This is a quote by one of my favorite authors, Henry Scoggle, who is a Scottish scholar and pastor back in the 1700s. And he says, all men are endued with rational and immortal souls, with understandings and wills capable of the highest and most excellent things, and if they be at present disordered and put out of tune by wickedness and folly, this may indeed inhibit our compassion, but not ought to, in reason, extinguish our love. When we see a person of rugged humor and perverse disposition, full of malice and dissimulation, very foolish and very proud, it is hard to fall in love with an object that presents itself unto us under an idea so little grateful and lovely. But when we consider these evil qualities as the diseases and distempers of a soul, which in itself is capable of all that wisdom and goodness wherein the best of saints have ever been adorned, and which may one day come to be raised into such heights of perfection I shall render it a fit companion for the holy angels. This will turn our aversion into pity and make us behold him with such resentments as we should have when we looked upon a beautiful body that was mangled with wounds or disfigured by some loathsome disease. And however we hate the vices, we shall not cease to love the man. What do you think about that quote? They're still captives. They're still blind, right? That quote comes to mind all the time when I run into some people occasionally at work that are just like, what is wrong with that person? You know, it's sin, exactly. It is a curse. You think sometimes as Christians we forget that? Yeah, well, you know, they're a problem, but we tend to, we appropriate the same dynamic of culture and sometimes apply it to ourselves too, don't we? There's really nothing wrong with me. It's someone else's fault, or, you know, it's my parents' fault, or it's these people that my supposed friends, everyone else's fault, other than the fact that I am a broken, lost, sinful person. And if it was only for God's grace, I would be exactly like them, okay? So sometimes we need to remember that, I think. Some of the probably most quote-unquote mean people that I've come into are probably those in greatest need of the gospel. I know we're all in great need of the gospel, but they are really just struggling, and everyone else just treats them as pariahs when they really need someone to show them the love of Christ, and something to think about when we remember that. And then one other quote, again, this is looking at the peril of the lost, which is another sobering thing, which gets back to our first point, knowing the fear of God. Again, this is by Henry Scago, says, that compassion which made God give his dearest son for the redemption of mankind will never prevail for the pardon and deliverance of any impenitent sinner. Abused goodness will certainly turn into fury, and infinite mercy, being despised, shall bring down upon sinners all the dreadful effects of an omnipotent vengeance. Lost people are in peril. I mean, do we really believe that? I think the doctrine of hell is something that is not preached anymore. It's probably not believed by a lot of people. In fact, I've run into students where that seems to be a big barrier to even believing in God. I just can't believe God would send people to hell, okay, which is a gross mischaracterization of reality, but that's another story. But anyway, if we really believe that there is a hell that people are going to be consigned to by their own free will, we should be motivated to try to reach those people, shouldn't we? Okay? That's right. That's right. That's why I think, again, sometimes you have to wait for God to orchestrate circumstances in their life where they come to the point where they recognize their need for God, and then you need to be ready to respond when that arises. We need to be. But I think sometimes we do a very poor job as the church demonstrating the supernatural difference of Christ in our lives and what is treasuring about Christ, right? I don't think we really communicate that. A lot of times our message gets translated into, we're against all these things, right? Or even, I think sometimes the affiliation of the church with certain political perspectives tends to dilute our message inadvertently sometimes. But okay, I have a few other questions. Here's some reasons I've heard from people why they don't witness. I want you to discuss these 4 questions and see what you think about them. All right. Well, I mean, Romans 2 actually even uses, you stand condemned by your own standards, right? You don't have to go to the Bible to get standards. People, you see this in our culture. Everyone is judging everyone else, and when people do that, I just cringe. It's like, man, you're setting up the standard that you're going to be judged by, and you're going to be found short. So, but what about the third one? There are people out there supposedly that are Christians that have written books and other stuff that basically deny the existence of hell, right? I think, again, it gets back to this concept of fairness, which I think is just, it just shows a brutal lack of understanding of what hell is, I think. So, again, if you... And sin, both of those. Yeah. We don't recognize the severity of our sin against a holy, infinite God, do we? Yeah. And then number 4, I'm not really sure I believe all this stuff. I hear how Christ is real in their life, but I don't experience that. So I don't feel really confident to be able to share something I don't know if I have. Anybody ever heard that response? So I list all 4 of these, not only just to think about responsive at others, but maybe sometimes even things that we struggle with occasionally, right? About that can be barriers to providing an effective witness. So we'll be talking about those more as we walk through some of these other laws. The last thing I was going to have you do, and quickly in the few minutes we have left, is to try to give me a synopsis of the gospel. So if someone came up to you and said, Seth, I've heard about this gospel. What is it? What is that? What is the gospel? How would you respond to that? And I've given enough space there for a whole dissertation, but you can give me a tagline if you want. Okay. If we're going to share the gospel, we first need to know what it is, right? Or be able to define it. So certainly if we're going to be effective in evangelism, we need to have some kind of answer with regard to that, right? Peter talked about when people approach us for the hope that we have in us, that we are able to give them a response. And if you don't have a real answer for that, that would be a good homework assignment to kind of sit down and think through what would, if I was explaining what the gospel is, what would it be? And I think sometimes we feel pressed to kind of encapsulate that into a few words, which I'm not sure is the best strategy, certainly in today's culture. I think we're not asking for a single conversation, but beginning a dialogue, right? There's a lot of elements to the gospel that sometimes I think are misunderstood, and it's incumbent upon us to take time to kind of walk through the ramifications of those issues. So, and sometimes in defining what the gospel is, it can be useful to define what it's not, right? Right. Okay. Well, I put a little sheet of my own thoughts on the gospel back there. I think that was one of the handouts. You can critique that one for homework, okay? So for next week, I want you to review one of the YouTubes on Lostology that I gave you in your notes. Look at the first 4 laws, because we're going to go through those in detail next week. And I gave you a list of 20 movies about lostness. Maybe if you have time, you might want to watch one of those from the perspective of not just enjoying the movie, but thinking about the characters, their degree of lostness, and how the gospel could reach those people. So kind of thinking about if you were in the story, how could you express the gospel in the context of that situation? Okay? All right, let's close with the word of prayer. Dear God, just thank you so much for this time together. Thank you for our opportunity to look at what you tell us about lost people so that we can be more effective in fulfilling your admonition to share the gospel. Just this week, Lord, help us to think about opportunities that you might present us. Help us to be looking for those and to have the courage to respond when the Holy Spirit prompts us to. And Lord, just help us to remember to thank you for our own salvation, for the gift of love and forgiveness that you've given to us. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen.